So, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen in court today, but let's say the courts were to, for example, order a rerun in some of the constituencies.
MPP will lose all of them.
Rerun.
MPP will lose all of them.
You believe so?
Yes.
The MPP will
See,
lose.
the psychology of voter...
If there was a rerun.
The psychology of voter is very complicated. Do you know why would they have to bring the parliamentary and the presidential election on the same day?
People had problems. You know, there are a few people who had problems with your sampling and your sample size, and you know they were calling you out and questioning, you know, your sample size, saying it's not an accurate representation of the entire population. Because how can you explain that for us? How are you able to get accurate, you know, data or an accurate reflection or representation of what the generality of people feel, you know, with the sample size that you're working with?
You know, when it comes to sampling, you know, the theory is that the bigger the better. But not when you have tons of information that you know you can narrow down the sampling size and still be accurate. What we did was that over the 2 or so 3 years, we knew what proportion of voters say they are NDC nationally, what proportion say they are MPP, floating voters, other parties, and those who don't tell you their party affiliation. What we did was that we drew a sample from this sample.
Okay.
So, for example, we said, okay, let's interview 35% of our sample from the MPP stocks, 32% from NDC stock, 20% from floating voters, 3% from others, and maybe 10% from those who don't tell us.
Right.
We have all this data. So if we are interviewing 7,000, we allocate 35% of that 7,000 to MPP people.
Okay.
32 to NDC. But because we have done this work for a very long time, we're able to bring the sample down to 2,500 a week and still apply that percentage to that 2,500 constantly. And when we've done the allocation for MPP, we then ask ourselves, where should we allocate this 35%? Because we know that most MPP supporters are in Ashanti region, followed by Greater Accra, Eastern, Central, in that order. We then allocate this 35% to the regions based on where we know there are more MPP voters, in that order.
Okay.
So we first do this party affiliation and then also allocate based on where we can find most MPP people. So when we are calling MPP people in Ashanti region, we say we're going to call about 25% of the 35% from Ashanti region. Because on the average, that number of MPP people live in Ashanti region.
So that's how you're able to, you know, come up with, because so you already have the figures.
Exactly.
You know, of all the
and
people,
then to make
and then you're able to narrow it down.
Absolutely. And then to apply randomness, random probability sampling.
Okay.
We have tons of MPP people in the Ashanti region. Well, do we call all of them? No. We dial up the number that we have randomly. So nobody knows what number will come up.
So it's not the same every time. It's not the same people every time.
No, we have a pool.
You have a pool, but it's not. It's done at random.
At random.
Yeah.
So when you pick any random number from Ashanti region, their MPP, their views will be the same. Whether they're from Bantama or they are from Eshaesu or Kwabere East. Look, so this data is quite rich, and we do it regularly every week. The number wasn't changing. The differences were just 1% here and there. So we knew we were doing something right. And then when we compared that telephone polling data with times when we interviewed 7,000 or 10,000, there wasn't much difference. So when people were shouting about sample size, we were just laughing at them. It's not about the volume of sample, but the quality of how you deploy the sample.
Right.
Whether the sample represents the people that you're talking to. If you look at in the US or in the UK, where they have over 150 million voters, or maybe 50 million voters thereabout, the sampling for this American population is probably about 3,000, sometimes 7. The highest I've seen is 6,000 in America. America of all people. So if they're getting it right,
millions,
and we are here shouting that our sample size is small when we are about 18.something million. So it's not about the volume. You can just do 300,000 sample. But if you don't make sure that those 300,000 are well represented across the country, you get a skewed result. That's why most people got everything wrong.
But you got it right. And we witnessed also in the election that we had people like, Alan Chemanting polling about 2%, Cheddar polling about 3 point, something percent. But in the end, their figures went down significantly. But those of the NDC and the MPP, like you mentioned, was quite spot on. So what happened? What happened to Alan Chemanting and Cheddar, who are showing very strongly?
Prior to the poll, we've been saying that GM always outperform the polling numbers in the election. He always does. And NDC always does. If you poll NDC and they are 25%, you can say that you could add 3% to that 25%.
Right.
By custom. Remember, Sir John once said that he doesn't know where NDC vote comes from. On election day, you see the numbers coming. Because people who normally intend to vote for John or NDC, sometimes they hide their true intention. But in this particular election, what happened was that, look, I believe, and after talking to people post-election, there were people who were going to vote for Alan Chemanting and Bediakun as a protest vote.
That's what they had intended.
Intended to vote, yes. So the poll prior to the election was accurate. What happened? If you look at the poll we did on election day, the exit poll, about 8% of voters made up their mind in the last 4 weeks of the election. The last 4 weeks. Now, these were the people who shifted from Alan Chemanting and Bediako to Mahama. Those who decided at the last minute who to vote for, they broke heavily for Mahama. When we inquired a bit, I think there was a bit of apprehension on people's part.
Apprehension?
Yes. And suspicion.
Okay.
People had somehow come to the conclusion that the EC was up to something. Rightly or wrongly.
But people had the perception.
Perception.
That the EC was up to something.
Yes.
For this coming election.
Absolutely. And also they didn't understand why the MPP was getting more confident when they realized that, look, this should be obvious that you're going to lose.
But the MPP were pretty confident.
So people were thinking, is it a coincidence or something is somewhere in somebody's sleeves? So those who were thinking of voting for Alan and Chemanting did not want any election that could be close, for there to be any chaos.
So they just decided to go for the NDC.
Who were decided at the last 4 weeks went away from Alan and Cheddar and went straight to Mahama.
Because they felt that,
yes, they want to avoid any confusion.
I don't want to vote for a candidate who is not going to win anyway. So let me just
throw the country into pandemonium.
Yeah, so let me just go and give it to John Mahama.
Yes.
Right, so that's what happened.
That's what happened, yes, that's what happened.
Wow.
We know that from the exit polls.
So let's get into, some of the cases that are still outstanding. There are 9 parliamentary seats seemingly which are still outstanding, right? 7 of them were redeclared for the NPP, right? 7 of them were redeclared for the NPP. And the NDC went to court, to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court allowed 3 to stay. In those 3, there was no collation that was, completed. And so the collation was done and those results were declared. So the Supreme Court says that stays. But then the 4, which were re-declared, if I should put it that way, recollated and redeclared after they had earlier been declared, the Supreme Court says that is null and void. Go back, hear the mandamus application at the High Court and all of that. What did the numbers say in each of these 9 constituencies before elections? From Madraji to Okai.
In Madraji, the poll shows that Anandampa was going to win.
Okay. And he's won. He's been declared.
He's been declared winner. Yeah. So I wasn't quite surprised with that number. It doesn't matter what argument people put up, but the poll area had showed he was going to win. but the win is quite narrow compared to what the poll was suggesting. If you look at Tema Central, for more than 6 months, the poll shows they were losing Tema Central.
It showed that the MPP were losing
Tema Central. And if you look at Dome Kwabinya, the poll shows they were losing Dome Kwabinya. If you look at Abdulkumanov, the poll shows they were losing. The only constituency that showed they were winning was Okaikwe Central.
Okaikwe Central. That's Patrick Yabuama's constituency. The one Baba Sadiq,
absolutely,
says he's won.
That was what the polls were saying. But on the election day, when we did the exit poll, the poll showed that NDC was likely to win Okaikwe Central in the exit poll.
The exit poll?
Yes.
The last poll that was
done on the election day. When people had voted and they were going, we spoke to them. That poll showed NDC was winning Okaikwe Central. And then the poll showed NDC was winning Abdulkumanov. It showed they were winning Dome Kwabinya and they were winning Tema Central. Really? So there were so many evidence from data that showed that those seats actually probably they lost them.
Except for Nsawama Duaji. So out of the 9, apart from Nsawama Duaji,
the other 2, which is it Ahmano?
Yes, there's Techiman South.
The Techiman South, in fact,
there's Techiman South.
The Techiman South, the poll shows that Ajimesa Kosa was going to win with the narrow.
Okay, he was going to retain it.
Yes.
But it was going to be a narrow one.
A narrow one, yes.
I see. So, I mean, did it come as a surprise to you, some of those that were, redeclared for the NPP?
Yes, I was surprised. Really, honestly, I was surprised. Really, Tema Central and Abdulkumanov and which else was that? I don't know why they were.
Well, they're still trying to
No, I mean, if you look at where they're saying that they should be rerun, in that polling station, NDC won that polling station on the night with almost 66% of the vote. So there's no way you're going to win.
The declaration was done.
I mean, look, I think what EC was done is unthinkable. Honestly speaking.
You think what the EC has done is unthinkable?
No, unthinkable. Because
they believe that there were some irregularities.
No, they are saying that they said the wrong form. No, they said the wrong form was used. That's the case of that constituency. A wrong form. Those who signed the forms were alive. They haven't died. And nobody had disputed those numbers. All they needed to do was to pick the right form, complete the forms again using those figures, and ask for re-signing. This is akin to causing financial loss to the state. Frankly, it's just, it defies, it's mind-boggling, the approach, because there was no act of illegality. Or it's using the wrong form an act of illegality. No. So I don't know how they come to that conclusion, but only God knows.
So, we don't know what's going to happen in court today, but let's say the courts were to, for example, order a rerun in some of the constituencies.
MPP will lose all of them.
Rerun.
MPP will lose all of them.
You believe so?
Yes.
The MPP will
See,
lose.
the psychology of voter,
if there was a rerun.
The psychology of voter is very complicated. Do you know why would they have to bring the parliamentary and the presidential election on the same day? You know why? Because when people had voted for the presidential, and a party A has won the presidential, they tend to give the parliamentary to that party.
Because they've already won. That's why they do it on the same day.
So the psychology of voter is, okay, even if has already won the presidential and they have this number, why should I go and waste my time, give a vote to opposition? So the psychology of the voter doesn't support MPP in this case if they were rerunning.
So if the courts were to say, let's rerun, these constituencies.
And also you have the issue of apathy. Who is more energized to go and vote again? Is it NDC or MPP?
So it will not.
You have to even drag them to go and vote in the first place. And going back again, Masa, it will require bulldozer.
So it will not inure to the benefit.
No. Psychologically, it won't.
Wow, that's interesting. Now, was your team able to undertake its own collation during the elections?
No, that's not our job.
Okay. You just did the polling.
That's not our job, no.
You didn't collate any results, whatsoever?
No.
So when did the signs begin to become very clear, that the NDC was going to win? How early
For us, around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Remember we were doing exit poll?
Yes. So around 2 p.m. in the
afternoon. We knew NDC was winning, yes.
Before,
we
when the elections were still going.
You
knew that the NDC was going to win.
Yes.
And win with a huge margin.
Yes.
So it's not something that came, as a surprise.
No.
But even before the day of the elections, right? At the beginning of the year, or let's say even at the beginning of the second term, after we did the 2020 elections, right? At what point during the 4-year period did the tide begin to shift in favor of the NDC?
It was April 2022.
In 2022?
April 2022, when they passed the E-levy.
That's when the tide shifted?
Absolutely. Because in January poll that we did...
You did a poll around that time, with regard to the E-levy and all that.
Yes. In fact, in January, we did a poll, a hypothetical poll, between if it is Mahama against Baumia, if it's Mahama against Alan, who would you vote for? In January. And in that month, I think Mahama was 48% and Baumia 42%, below 50%. Now when they passed the E-levy, Mahama goes to 53%. Baumia 38% in April 2022. How far was that result from what we saw now?
It was pretty accurate.
So almost 3 years ago. We have a trend data from that period all the way till now. You could see where the elections or the race was and where it ended. Clearly, it was lost over 3 years ago.
Is there anything that the NPP could have done to turn things around?
I think,
given the data and what the polls were showing.
I think the failure to remove Ken Ofori-Atta early enough didn't help NPP. When there was agitation for him to be removed, he overstayed his post. It cost NPP a lot.
So if the president had heeded to the calls of the MPs,
some confidence would have returned back to
Ken Ofori-Atta.
No, look.
But he eventually did.
Well, it was too late. When Adam was brought in, there was a bit of stability and confidence returning into the financial sector and the economy of Ghana.
Yeah,
that should have been a long time ago.
So that was what. So from the E-levy, the passage of the E-levy, to refusal to remove Ken Ofori-Atta.
Yeah.
The
whole country was calling for it, including NPP supporters.
Turning points began. So what role did things like corruption and corruption perception play? I mean, you did polls on that. The things that are of importance to Ghanaians, and I think the NCC did a poll on that. And some other agencies also did polls on that, the things that are of importance. And I know you also did polls on that: corruption, religion, the economy, and education, and others. What role did all of these issues play in contributing to the outcome of the election?
I'll look at the key issues before the polls and on the day of the polling. Before the elections, it was the economy, number one issue, jobs, number two, education, number three. And I think corruption was around fifth or sixth.
Right.
It wasn't ranking high among the general voters. And on election day, it didn't change. But if you look at the demographic of people who are upper and middle and upper income voters, corruption was higher among those groups than
upper and higher class voters.
Some people came to vote because they felt there was too much corruption, and those numbers we didn't pick during the polling, but we saw that on the exit poll. We saw that the corruption has elevated on the day of election than it had been in the past. Remember, sometimes it's difficult to get certain demographic of voters when you are doing the polling. For example, people who are the upper class, you hardly get them to talk to them on the street when we go out there to speak to people. So at the point in time, I think we did a special poll of the upper class people, which means we have to adapt new ways of tracking who they were. So what we did was that we went to Marina Mall, Accra Mall, ANC Mall, and some places that we know people who are affluent come there and shop. So we were polling them from Lorry Park. So when you get down from your car, we see your car type and then we engage you.
Okay.
So we're trying to profile them by the car they type, they drive. And we saw a different kind of...
See where they are.
Exactly. Generally, they were aligned with voters, but on certain issues, they differ. And they differ on corruption.
So corruption was that issue for them,
for
the
them,
middle
yes.
class,
Yes.
and then, you know,
Yes.
the upper class.
Yes.
So what about religion? How much of a role did religion play?
This is a very tricky question. Sometimes we, as posters, we tend to delve into and trying to understand. When you put 10 issues and give them to a voter to pick 3, the most important, religion and ethnicity doesn't register, because he's concerned about the economy, about the jobs, and education. So these are important issues for many, many people. Religion doesn't come up at all. But if you end it there, you could be misleading yourself. But what we have done recently is that we then tease religion and ethnicity out and ask them a question again. How important was religion of the candidate a factor in your decision? On this occasion, religion is a question on its own, not to be confused with so many others. So on this score, then you see about 19% saying it was somehow important or very important, which is